And welcome to What a Scream, the podcast where I, your host, Golly Miss Dolly, chats about horror movies with a special guest every week. And in particular, we talk about two films that we feel perfectly embody a certain topic or subgenre that I have previously randomly chosen. So this week is another subject that I'm kind of educating myself on. I'm not really a big fan of. I've never really gotten into this. So it was another learning experience for me. This week is all about video games and movies that have come from video games, which there isn't actually a lot out there. Funnily enough, it's one of the topics me and my guest cover about why video games have not really got a lot of movie adaptations, and if they have, they're pretty awful. I have never really been into gaming. I used to play Crash Bandicoot back in the day. I'm sure everybody did. A little bit of Abe's Odyssey, but other than that, I never got into playing video games. Never had the patience. I'm a very impatient, I freak out if I don't win first time. So yeah, I never got into it. And really the only two films that I was aware of that were made from games were Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and these are actually the two films that myself and my guest are going to be talking about today. And we touch on a little bit some other ones, and we also talk about the horror genre within video games as well. So my guest this week, she has been on the podcast before. In fact, she was my very first guest on the very first episode. It is Emma Tyrrell, a forensic psychologist and fellow horror nerd. So here is our chat about horror video games and two films, pretty much the only two films that are kind of worth watching. So that is the very first Resident Evil with Mila Jovovich, based on obviously the Resident Evil games, and Silent Hill as well. So here it is, enjoy. I would like to welcome back to the podcast Emma Tyrrell, who was my very first guest way back in the day. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be back. Can't wait to chat shit about the themes for today.
So much shit. So in case anyone didn't listen to the very first episode, A, shame on you. B, would you like to give a quick reintroduction as to who you are?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Emma Tyrrell. I'm a forensic psychologist. So I deal with basically dealing with offenders after they've been caught, and just kind of figuring out how they tick, what kind of made them do what they do, and how to help them then in the future to just not reoffend, really. So it's not just figuring them out, it's also trying to figure out how to help everybody else and make sure nothing like that happens again. So
very good. And obviously I've already asked you how you got into horror, so let's not get into that. But how about I ask you, have you watched any good horror films recently?
Ooh, recently? No. Like it's
well, no good ones anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I've been just rewatching kind of classics and stuff. I don't know whether that's just with my anxiety peaking at the moment. It's just more fun to watch things that, you know, I know what's going to happen. Yeah. But I haven't come across anything that I'm like really want to watch and stuff like that. You know, I know there was, I don't know if it's exactly horror, but like Run with which is like the Netflix film that came out, which had finally like had the first like actual person who uses a wheelchair as a role, which was, you know, that's good. But it sounded a bit familiar for the real life case of Jeannie and stuff. So I wasn't really sure if I really wanted to watch that. But however, tonight I'm very excited because I'm going to be starting that Prime series.
Oh, them.
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to start that soon.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've been really looking forward to it. So hopefully it lives up to the hype. I'm sure it will.
Yeah. Yeah. It looks I'm excited about that one. And I think
Yeah.
as well, just at the moment, like I think a TV series is a bit I'm more able to handle it than a full blown film at the moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to fall asleep after like half an hour of a film unless I really have to like sit there and watch it and pay attention.
yeah.
Um, so let's introduce our theme for this week. I didn't pull this one out the hat. I came to you directly for it because I knew that you're kind of an expert on this field as well. So our theme for this week is video games and specifically movies that have been adapted from video games.
Yeah.
It was I have no clue about video games whatsoever. I used to play Crash Bandicoot, the first and second Crash Bandicoot, and that was it. That was it. I don't have a good temperament for video games. But you're a massive fan, aren't you?
Yeah, like I grew up with two brothers that were like obsessed with video games. So like we were lucky, fortunate enough, to have like um every single Game Boy that came out. We had PlayStations, Xboxes. We had friends that had like Segas. We had friends that had Dreamcast and stuff like that. So we are always able to play like different games. And
Yeah.
then obviously we grew up in a time as well where arcades were a thing.
Uh-huh.
And so we were able to like go to the local bowling alley and play in the arcades and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I've always been kind of obsessed with it. Now, I'm obsessed with video games and I love them so much, but I am woeful at them. Like never ever been good. Like
Yeah.
you're talking about Crash Bandicoot, that sends me into such a rage, and I'm so awful at it. And then especially like we'll probably talk further into it later on, but it's like for me, like RPG games are the
Mhm.
easiest game for me because you kind of take things at your own pace, and like if you're crap, you can kind of level up till you can kind of squeak by. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
like I'm terrible, but I love them. Like I absolutely adore just getting lost in the game, getting lost in the story and the plot and seeing how it develops and everything. Like it's just really good fun.
Yeah.
Like
I think I never got into them because um like I came from quite a poor family and the only thing that we had was I used to get like £2 pocket money from a great aunt at the time every week, and I
yeah,
saved that up to buy the first PlayStation, but
yeah,
all I could afford was like the first Crash Bandicoot.
yeah.
And I used to play that so hard that when I let go of the controller, my hand was stuck in like the claw and then it'd shake for about an hour afterwards. And I just don't have I don't have the patience. I don't have the temperament for it. I get very angry, very like frustrated. And I just give up. Like, I'm just like, no, you know what? Fuck this. And then when I got a bit older, I got a DS
Mhm.
and I got a zombie game on it. But one of the zombies jumped out at me and I just threw the DS like out of like instinct. I just threw the DS and I was like, well, that's the end of that one. So that is my gaming history. So it's very, very small, very insignificant. I just cannot get into them at all. So getting onto the subject of horror video games, do you like playing horror video games?
Yeah, like they're one of my favorite genres. I think there's so much work that goes into them. And like the character developments, the plots, like the fact that they obviously kind of are hoping to, have sequels and a franchise. So
Mm,
they tend to put a lot of time into it. And then also just the technology jump has been
yeah.
insane. Like, um, like off the top of my head, like some of my favorite horror games that I played was like Amnesia, PT, Until
Mhm.
Dawn. I'm currently finishing up the second one of the Dark Anthology series,
Mhm.
or Anthology even because I can't pronounce things. The Little Hope, and that's based on like Salem witch trials and stuff like
Okay.
that. And it's the same kind of premise with Until Dawn is the fact that like it's based on your decisions and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And that's how you change the story. Dino Crisis was a big one for me when I was
Yeah.
young. I never really got very far, but my brothers used to, so that's how I lived through that one. That one, like, it's horror because of the fact that you're having to shoot dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's pretty horrific.
It's literally like, the terrifying scene in Jurassic Park
Yeah,
of where they're like in the actual building. That's
yeah.
essentially what Dino Crisis is that you're locked in a building with all these fucking dinosaurs and you're like, ah! And then obviously I played Resident Evil, quite a few of them, and Silent Hill and Little Nightmares as well, which like,
Yeah,
it's still a horror thing, but like I love it because it's just a really
yeah.
interesting thing that they've done it. So
And does horror games, like, does it give you any sort of like anxiety? Because I've always like, I'd listen to people talk about playing horror games and, playing stuff like Slender Man and having things jump out of you. And it was really scary because, you kind of immerse yourself. Does it like, is it anxiety inducing? And is it kind of, if we take it back to horror films, is it that same kind of, it might put the fear into you, but because it's in a controlled environment, you kind of get a bit of a high off it?
yeah, I think so. Like I always find that I think the reason that I tend towards keep going back to like horror video games is like I find myself more immersed than I would do like a movie.
Yeah,
To say I'm not immersed in a film, but like because you're the person controlling what happens, or just having to deal with whatever is getting thrown at you,
yeah,
like I find myself more scared and like terrified. And there's times when I've had to just pause it and just take a breather. You know what I mean? Or I've made a mistake and it's all gone wrong and I'm like, no, like
yeah,
devastated. But yeah, I find it more immersive. I'd say definitely it's more anxiety inducing and stuff like that. And like also that's usually like a good key thing for me is like if I know at the moment I'm not doing great mental health wise, I won't play a game.
yeah,
So I haven't picked up a game in ages. Like the Little Hope game. I bought it like a while ago and I'm nearly finished it, and I nearly finished it in 2 days. And then I haven't picked it up since. And I'm still just like, oh, I'd like to see what happens in that. But
yeah,
I'm just not there at the moment. Like
yeah.
I'm too tired after work and I'm just like not feeling sitting there. But I might actually do it later because like I've been thinking about it more preparing for today's
Yeah,
like task. But now I'm like, well, I think I gotta finish that now.
yeah. It sounds good. I think I would be more into the RPG
Mhm.
stuff because it's not as I'm very competitive. I'm very how to put this lightly so I don't come across as an asshole. So I think when it's stuff that like when there is a competitive streak to a game, I get very angry when I don't perform fantastically the first time around, which is ridiculous because no one does. But I think RPG would suit me a bit more. And as you know, I've been looking for Until Dawn. But I think I'm going to have to buy a PS4 for that.
I think that's all that's on at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Um,
like you'll love that. Like it's great.
yeah.
So
Okay. I think I might take the plunge then. So let's talk about movie adaptations of video games.
Mhm.
Um, I had to ask you about this because I only knew of two.
Mhm.
And even then, it was like we got a bit of a franchise from the two,
Yeah.
Silent Hill and Resident Evil. And then you suggested two more that I had
Mhm.
never heard of, although I think I'd already seen one, but I'd never heard of. Why
Yeah.
do you think we don't get a lot of movie adaptations of games? We have it the other way around where there's plenty of like game adaptations of movies, but why
Yeah.
do you think it's not the same the other way around?
Um, I think mainly like one, maybe the track history of how it hasn't worked out very well.
Yeah.
Like I don't know whether there's also maybe issues with like maybe buying rights to those
Okay.
kind of, I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
like I think as well a lot of the time the games themselves have enough story and enough like character development, because like see the great thing about games is that you can take the time to do that
Yeah.
and it makes logical sense and stuff like that, whereas in a film you've got to just like condense everything, and then I think they kind of tend to leave a lot out,
Yeah.
um or have their own kind of creative spin on it, which
Mhm.
just even like remotely come back to the lore of the actual game.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like there was a massive surge in the early 2000s, and
Yeah.
that's kind of like all the movies that we're talking about are the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know whether it's kind of like maybe they just know not to, or that there's no point, or
Yeah.
that they know they're not going to get enough. Like I could easily see like some games getting a TV like series.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think that would be good because you have enough time. But
Yeah.
I think the movies, it's too short. There's too much going on, and if you have too much of a character development and plot development heavy kind of movie, that's all it's going to be for the whole
Yeah.
first thing. And people won't watch that because people
Yeah.
are lazy, don't like to do that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think it's also because we've got these characters that people have played for
mm,
hours and hours and hours, so they've really literally like become that character,
mm,
and you know, putting it in a film, it's such a personal thing for people that perhaps no one could do it justice. And you
yeah,
know, that kind of, you're never going to get that perfect character because everyone individually has already played as that character. So there's that kind of, you know, personal thing going on that I don't think translates well to, like, in my opinion. Obviously I know nothing about video games, so I'm just guessing here. But let's chat about Resident Evil,
mhm.
um because that was kind of, was it the first major horror video game adaptation, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it was one of the first. Like I think it was one of those ones that got a lot of hype for a while, so
Yeah.
people knew it was coming. Like if you think of the game series, like for Capcom, which are the people that develop
Mhm.
it, like that was like the franchise has been their highest grossing one.
Yeah.
So I think they were like, oh, great, a movie adaptation. That'll be
Yeah.
like win. And it definitely was because it's one that um even kind of like it's one of the first ones. It's definitely not the first, but it was one of the first
Yeah.
ones for mainstream to be dubbed like, zombie survival horror game.
Yeah.
So like that kind of like brought people in, and then they were like, this would be a great idea for a film. And I
Yeah.
think that's why, like, yeah, I think it was definitely one of the first major ones, or at least one that was definitely more on the radar than maybe some of the other ones and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
So do you want to give us a quick synopsis of Resident Evil the film?
yeah. Okay. There's a
You're
lot
like, let me crack my knuckles, hang on.
like, it's one of those ones. I'm gonna just probably do a short
Yeah.
synopsis. So this is terrible, and like it's a divisive series of films for some reason, but I don't really care for them.
Yeah.
Um, game's great, movie's not. But, okay, so the director is Paul Anderson,
Uh-huh.
and now he said from the start when he was making these films that he wasn't going to rely very heavily or do a lot of tie-ins to the game franchise.
Yeah.
Um, However, basically, it starts off with the absolutely stunning and badass Mila Jovovich,
Mhm.
waking up in with memory loss. So she's in like an amnesia state, and she's waking up. There's a shower and curtain over her and stuff, and then she gets dressed in this lovely red dress. Basically, she like wakes up in this mansion. She's looking at pictures. She's there with like another guy in the picture, and she's no memory. Um, but then it turns out that this mansion is actually, there's like an underground rail or underground like train station underneath it. And so these lovely men from the Umbrella Corporation, who essentially they're like a pharmaceutical like bio warfare
Mhm.
like kind of conglomerate, let's say.
Yeah.
And essentially what's happened is that someone has stolen the T virus, which is what they were using to run experiments on animals and people and shit like that. And it's causing basically a zombie outbreak and all these
Uh-huh.
monsters and stuff like that. But essentially, someone stole it from the hive, which is like their like secret base thingy.
Mhm.
And the Red Queen, who is like an AI who runs the whole thing. It's actually like the boss's like AI of its daughter or something
Yeah.
like that. And basically, because of the breach, she freaks out and she kills everybody in there and locks everything down, and then releases this gas which kills people. But for Alice, our main character, and Spencer, that just wipes their memory.
Uh-huh.
And And then it turns out that in the end, Spence is the bad guy, even though, like, you know, we're all like, oh, he's great and he seems
Yeah.
all lovely. And then the minute he remembers he's the bad guy, in a very quick, out of nowhere sequence, finds him. And then he's like, wait, I'm the bad guy. And immediately turns into an asshole.
Yeah.
And oh, completely forgot who I was. Oh, okay. Let me just, you know. And essentially there's like lasers that cut people up, and there's like so many things, and like, you know, devil dogs and
Yeah.
like all these creepy monsters, and like called like liquor and stuff like that. Um so like it's a pity, just given the time frame, like that CGI was not really their friend.
Oh
Um
God.
yeah, it has not aged well. Like
No, not at all. I mean, the early 2000s was really especially in horror films, when CGI was just so overused, and you can see it across every genre of horror, in like you know, haunted house,
yeah.
kind of slashers, zombies was really becoming really big in the early 2000s, and unfortunately they started using CGI as opposed to makeup or, you know, special effects. And when I was watching Resident Evil, oh God, it was just awful. It was
Yeah.
absolutely awful. You know, we talked about it before we came on. I
Mhm.
didn't remember Resident Evil being this bad. I remember seeing it, and part of me was trying to justify it because I was like, I think I was going through my stage of loving kick-ass action women.
Mhm.
You know, I had like massive crush on Angelina Jolie. I had a massive crush on Mila Jokovic after I saw this, and Michelle Rodriguez. Like those three, like I loved them. They
Yeah.
were like my wet dream.
Yeah.
And I think I got, I was blinded by the kick-ass women in this film. But looking back at it, I was just like, oh my God, this is awful.
Mhm.
Absolutely awful. The CGI is terrible and glitchy, and yeah, it doesn't hold well.
No, like, you know, they were trying to shoot zombies and they wouldn't die, and then Mila kicks them once and then they're dead, and you're like, although that's cool, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like,
And I just love the way she, like, all of a sudden she can roundhouse kick a zombie in the head, and you're just like, how
yeah.
how
And that's the thing, like, yeah, it's just like, even because they obviously did a lot of choreography and stuff like that as well, but there's still just like the usual problems of like action tropes where it's just like cut down different
oh
directions.
God, yeah,
And you're like, you're taken away from, like, either that it didn't look well and you had to do it, or you're
yeah,
just the usual thing where you think multiple cuts makes it look good, but then we all know that multiple cuts usually means it didn't.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's like, and it's one of those things, like, yeah, like I when I was rewatching the first one, and then I do like the bit at the end, you know, like she wakes up strapped to the hospital bed and she comes out and she takes the gun out of the police
yeah,
thing and realizes it's all just like a whole zombie apocalypse has happened.
yeah,
And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I said, you
yeah,
know, as well, but they were very confident of sequel. Bombed like critically.
yeah,
However, it actually did quite well in the box office, like money
right.
wise. Um, and then like I was like, maybe I like the second one. And, and then I was like, oh, I think I did. I think I like the second one. And then I was like rewatching it and I went, no, awful. No, this is terrible. I was like, in a matter of like 12 hours, like completely locked down the city and stuff. I'm like, that would never happen. If apart from the fact of a zombie apocalypse, which now seems these days more likely.
Yeah.
I'm just like, there's no way, and especially with how the Irish government has dealt with this bloody COVID outbreak, we definitely wouldn't have to take lockdown. We couldn't even, we still don't do it properly.
Yeah,
So I was just like, this is unrealistic. Now I think what it was that I loved Jill in the Resident Evil games, and I think that's why I thought I really liked the movie, because it introduced her. But then
yeah.
you just look at her and she's there in a boob tube for the whole thing, and you're like, in a video game it works, but in a movie, no.
You're like, we know that is not physically appropriate.
Kind of like, you know, zombies and go, oh, sorry, hang on a
Yeah.
second.
Ooh, hoist it up there.
Yeah, like those
Yeah,
things do not say. So like, no.
absolutely not. You'd have one boob like flapping out all over the place, smacking the zombies in the head. Like, it just wouldn't.
Well,
No.
maybe that would have made it more interesting. I don't know.
But there was Spawn. There's a whole series of Resident Evil, and I've seen the second one. I don't think I bothered afterwards. Is there 4 or 5 at the moment?
There are. So the last one they released was in 2016.
Okay.
So yeah, they had the first one, 2002, 2004 was Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Um, then there was Extinction in 0708 or something.
Yeah.
In 2010, there was Afterlife, and then there was 2012, which was Retribution, and then there was the final chapter in 2016. So like they kept going, even though critically didn't do well. Like they
Yeah.
were still putting in some money. Like I think if you didn't play the games and you like a bit of action movies,
Yeah.
you probably like them. But
Yeah.
it's just, well, maybe at the time more so than now.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I prefer the games and I
Yeah.
don't see movies. And like it's quite interesting when you look at like people's differing opinions. So like everyone's ranked like those movies, and like they actually switch quite a lot depending on people's opinions on things, but the majority is just like he strayed quite far away. Like it's such an interesting concept of something, and the movies just kind of fell short, and they had so much material to use, but because he kind of deviated away from it, it just kind of fell flat and was just more action movie than anything related to the franchise, I feel,
Yeah.
anyway.
I definitely think I went through the obsession with Resident Evil, like the films, because A, I was a massive gay. B, um, B, zombies were making a bit of a comeback in the early 2000s. They were remaking of the Dead series.
Yeah.
There was like Land of the Dead,
Mm.
and then Resident Evil came out. And so at the time, I was obsessed with zombies. Everything about zombies I absolutely loved. And I think that's why I loved Resident Evil so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I was watching it last night and this morning. I finished it this morning, couldn't finish it in one take. And I was trying to see, because I noticed in a lot, well, in the other horror, I was going to say in a lot of the films, but there wasn't a lot of films, that they kind of integrated gameplay like elements into the film. And I was trying to see this with Resident Evil. And the only thing that I could kind of see, like obviously being a complete novice when it comes to video games, was the AI kind of narration of what was going on, that I could kind of say, well, that's probably the only bit of gameplay. What do you think, obviously, because you've played Resident Evil?
Yeah, like, well, they definitely like definitely paid homage to like outfits.
Yeah.
And but I'm not gonna lie, I was like, oh yeah, no. Like
Yeah.
instantly recognizable in that sense.
Yeah.
Like I played the games and then watched the films. Yeah, like there's slight bits of it, like some of maybe now when you're thinking of like the very early games, they're limited by when they were made, which is like
Yeah.
96, stuff like that. But then with the remakes and stuff, you can kind of see it, and maybe some of the action shots are kind of like, you can kind of see that it's kind of video gamey, but I don't know, like I think this is just something that kind of happens a lot when action horror
Yeah.
is kind of made into a film, and they rely so heavily on the action side of it, because they're like, oh, let's do lots of pew 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 pew,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, but the horror is what kind of adds to it as well, and I think
Yeah.
that kind of gets left behind. And then so the video game elements of like the gun use and the all the rest, that's all still there, which is part of the gameplay, but there's still
Yeah.
so much more, and I think that's just like a bit disappointing, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely lacking in the horror kind of. And I think that is partly due to the CGI kind of. I mean, when the dogs come in, and half of it is they've obviously put some poor dog in like a meat suit and they've got them walking around, but then the actual action sequences they've CGI'd into these like awful looking dogs.
Yeah.
And it just takes away the horror
Mm-hmm.
of everything. And then the big monster at the end, you're like, what am I looking at? Like, what is this? This is a mess.
Yeah, and like that's the thing, like some of those could have been so well done
Yeah.
with like actually like just making the models themselves, and
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean, like it's just, especially, you see like big blockbuster films that like use animatronics and stuff like that, and
Okay.
they're always like even still hold up better,
Yeah.
even though you feel like, oh, it's a little bit dated, but so much better than CGI. And like I do
Yeah.
get it, like CGI is difficult if they have a low budget, if they don't give their VFX artists enough time, which is
Yeah.
usually the main problem. They're just like, do this, and then don't
Yeah.
realize how much it takes. But I just, yeah, it just fell short, like in a lot of ways for me.
Yeah.
Like I do get, like I was the same. Like I was like, no, I thought I liked these more, and then rewatching them, I'm like,
Absolutely not. So would you recommend Resident Evil for horror movie fans and also horror video game fans?
for horror fans, no. There's just not enough horror in it. You know, I know
Yeah.
it's a zombie thing, but it's just there's so many great zombie films,
Yeah.
and this is not one of them at
Yeah.
all. Like, does not stack up to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And horror video game fans, I think it's kind of like personal preference, really.
Yeah.
I would say that like if you want to see how they interpreted them and you're not too, because like some people love playing video games and not actually getting too wrapped up in the characters. I'm not one of those people. I'm terrible.
Yeah.
I get real arsy about things. So like so like for me, I didn't enjoy it because it annoys me.
Yeah.
But for other people that are just loosely like the games, maybe they've only
Mm.
recently come into like the remakes of Resident Evil, so they're like,
Yeah.
oh, let me go see. And then also, to be honest, getting to watch like what 5 6 films of Mila Jokovic is just wonderful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let's move on to the second film that was also kind of a not massive blockbuster, but it was definitely popular when it came out in the cinema and has also spawned a bit of a franchise. So Silent Hill was the one that I chose, and I chose it because I really love it. I still love it, even though, unfortunately, yes, because of the early 2000s, it is very heavily CGI'd. But I still really love it because I feel like there's a lot of lore behind it, and I appreciate that. So, Silent Hill was a horror franchise based on a survival horror video game created by Kiichiro Toyama. The film came out in 2006, directed by Christoph Gans, and it tells of the town of Silent Hill, which is actually based on a real town, Centralia, Pennsylvania, where a local coal mine caught fire. And we see a mother of an adopted child, Sharon, who is prone to sleepwalking and cries about Silent Hill. So the mother decides to take Sharon to Silent Hill to figure out her past and what her connection is. At the same time, she's followed by a police officer, and they become trapped in Silent Hill. And are faced with lots of horrors and scary townspeople. What did you think of Silent Hill?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I've always been obsessed with it. Like, I was fortunate enough to be shown it by a friend of mine, and we used to watch it like multiple times a year. Like, but I didn't mind. I loved
Yeah.
it. Yeah, the CGI like does like not hold up too well, but I
Yeah.
still just like the characters are brilliant in it. Like, especially even just the creepy townsfolk and all that. Still, it's so heavily horror based, and
Yeah.
that's what's great about it. Do you know what I mean? And like hearing that siren and everything, like I still like go like, oh Jesus! Like
Yeah.
when I worked in Broadmoor Hospital, and like every Wednesday at no, or it's every day, I think. Every day at a certain time they ring the alarms, and
Yeah.
it's just to like test them, and it's just a thing. But like you're like locked in this like board, like there's like, you know, bars on the window in my office. And you're in this really old school like psychiatric hospital. And then the sirens go off and it sounds just like the Silent Hill one. And every time I was like, oh Jesus.
Expecting Pyramid Head to come around the corner. You're like,
The thing is, just like, you know, it's like a real foggy day, and I'm like, ooh, Silent Hill. Like, I love it. I love the whole background to it, the history. I think it was a really good homage to the game. I think it added to it. I think the acting's great. I just love it. I really
same.
like. Yeah, I still.
Yeah, like I know nothing of the game. I've never played it. I wouldn't have a clue. But I just, as you said, it's so based in horror, and it's so you know, every creature has a backstory and it has a connection, and it's not just there for the scares. It's like it has, every creature has like a reflection of real life, you know, of this child Alessa, who is Sharon's I don't know how to kind of explain it. Alessa was a child that was accused by the townsfolk of being a witch, and
Mhm.
so they burnt her, but they
Mm.
did not kill her, and that started the fire in Silent Hill in the coals. But they
Mhm.
did not kill her, and out of Alessa's rage was born the darkness.
Mhm.
But she wanted to have a pure, you know, a symbol of her pureness and her innocence, and that was Sharon. And that is why Sharon is so drawn to Silent Hill, why she's very connected to it. But I
Yeah.
love the way that every monster in Silent Hill has this reflection on someone from Alessa's living life. You know, we've got the janitor who's kind of creepy, and you know, there's kind of ringings of assault there. We've got the nurses who looked after her while she was in hospital. And we've got kind of Pyramid Head, who is the embodiment of her rage and her anger towards the townspeople, because whenever the siren goes off, he comes after the townspeople who are still out.
Mhm.
And I just loved just everything. It was all connected really well. It was all scary, even though it is CGI, scary. Like those nurses scare the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And they are
Yeah.
so iconic. Like apart from Pyramid Head, those nurses are so iconic, you
Yeah.
know, and it's just the sounds they make and the twitchy movements and the don't make a sound, otherwise they'll slice you with a scalpel. And
Yeah.
like scalpels scare the crap out of me.
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
there's something, you know, someone come at me with a butcher's knife and I'll be like, meh. Someone come at me with a scalpel and I'll be like, ah. You know, like, but I loved it. And I loved going back to, you know, reflecting on gameplay. I felt that when they did the flashbacks to Alessa's life, that was very gameplay like. You know, you enter a room and you have a
Mhm.
flashback.
Mhm.
And I really loved the way, even though, you know, even if you're not a video game fan, you've never played the games, you still get that feeling of being in a video game.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
really appreciated that. So compared to the video game, how do you think it kind of stands up as an adaptation?
Yeah, I think it was a really good adaptation. It really, it made sure it kind of studied the game and the background to it. I think it added a lot of elements. Like I just think it elevated it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I just, it was just such an interesting take on it. It's one of the probably only ones, or at least very select few, that actually is a good adaptation.
Yeah.
Like I it was one of those ones that it made me want to go back and play
Mm-hmm.
Silent Hill games, because I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I fucking love this. I was like, I completely
Yeah.
forgot how great this is. And like,
Yeah.
I'm more like, I love background loading, love all that kind of stuff. And the
Yeah.
way, like, as I said, everything is so tied in so well. You're just
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
think they did a really good job. And it's not a caricature of the game. It's
Yeah.
not like, it's not really obvious that it is from a game from one perspective. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, flash, here's some game
Yeah.
footage. Like, yes, this is where it's from, this is where we got it. And I just,
Yeah.
yeah, like I think they did a really good job. And
Yeah.
then we're not allowed to talk about the second film though, because that doesn't exist in my world.
Yeah, let's not talk about the second film. I watched the second film and I was like, I instantly regret this. It was awful. Even like, I mean, even Sean Bean. I love Sean Bean. I loved him in the first film. I
Yeah.
mean, Sean Bean could just sit on screen for like 10 minutes flat, not doing anything. I'd still love him. But
Yeah.
the second film is awful. And I'm like, what happened to his accent? His accent goes back to like his Northern English accent, which is his natural accent. And you're like, what happened? And then we've got flipping Jon Snow, Kit Harrington, who cannot do an American accent to save his life. You know, I always thought the American accent was one of the easiest accents to emulate, but he cannot do an American accent, and it is awfully acted. And it just, it's like clutching at straws. Like, how can we relate this back to the first film? And it's awful. But back to the first film, Christoph Gans worked very, very closely with the creators of Silent Hill. He traveled all the way to Japan to meet them and tell them his ideas, and he worked very closely to develop the film, and that really shows. Like, it really, really shows. Another thing I love about the film is that it kind of, even though it's an old age kind of trope in horror films, I love the fact that the horror isn't necessarily with the darkness and the monsters. It's actually the townspeople, the normal human beings who are the monsters. You know, they burn little children, they cry witch. It's like they are still living in the dark ages. And they're absolutely hideous. They're horrible people. Like I can't remember her name, but the leader.
Yeah,
Oh God, she's so evil.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure it's like Madame something.
Like my mind was like, wait, what? Yeah, like that's the thing. And like, yeah, as you said, like it is kind of a common trope, but I just think they did it so well.
Yeah.
Like I think like, as you're obviously expecting that because like that's what all the townspeople are fearing is the dark. And when they all have to scurry into the church because that's
Yeah.
where the holy place is, and that's where you're like,
Yeah.
sanctuary. And
Yeah.
but then it turns out like, oh, as per usual, anything related to the church is bad.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
by the end of it, when Alessa takes her revenge and she gets into the church, and all the townspeople are dying horrible deaths, you're cheering it on. You're like, yes, kill them all.
Get them.
Yeah, I mean, there's that horrible scene of, she's got the barbed wire, that's kind of her tendrils, and it goes right up into a woman's area through her mouth, and that is horrific. Like that, and I love that amount of horror. That's what Resident Evil should have done, is brought it back to the horror like Silent Hill did. I think it's a brilliant film. I absolutely adore Silent Hill. As you said, let's not talk about sequel. Was there a third one, or am I imagining that?
No, there's definitely more. Once I saw the second one, I just decided that there was only ever one Silent Hill, and that's all I'm going to remember.
Yeah. So would you I mean, I kind of know your answer, but would you recommend Silent Hill for horror movie fans and fans of the game?
Yeah, to both. Like, absolutely. Like I said before, like you can watch the movie without ever having or wanting to play the game.
Yeah.
And then you can play the game and then have a really enjoyable time watching the film.
Yeah.
I think it's just, I think we've praised it as much as we can, but it's just a really, really great adaptation. They put a lot of work into it.
Yeah.
I still think, even though some of the CGI is like a little bit dated, I still think it holds up really well. Like, as you said, like those nurses are fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
So like, and like, even like, in Halloween, and you'd have dress up competition, and someone is dressed up as that thing. I'm not going near that person. I'm like, I'm from afar. I'm like, you look amazing, but I'm like,
yeah, I definitely think they did the right balance of CGI and special effects makeup. Definitely. So there are two other films that we decided to give a go as well. Well, actually, for me, 1 and 15 minutes of another film, because I just turned it off. I was like, no, I can't deal with this. I absolutely cannot deal with this. So I can't even remember their names. That's how. What was their?
Well, so what I've done is, because these are all Uwe Boll films, okay? And if you know of him, he's a German director who has done all awful movies, but he also had a propensity to do awful video game adaptations that, one, either never needed to be made in the first place, or two, wouldn't even know they're actually video games from the way it goes on. So I actually looked at 3 because it's also terrible. I'll give you like a very brief thing on the 3 of them, because like, oh gosh, they're terrible. So, you have House of the Dead, which was his first one that he did. Then you have Alone in the Dark, and then you have also Blood Rain as well.
Okay.
Which would you like me to discuss first?
Well, let's start off with House of the Dead, because that is the one that I actually managed to get through. How, I don't know. I think I'd taken my medication by then. I was just like pretty chilled out. So it tells the story of kids. I assume they're on like spring break or something, and they go to an island to have a massive rave. But then all of a sudden there's zombies. That's pretty much all I can tell you. I can't remember how the zombies got there, but there's zombies. And it is interspersed with this gameplay footage that is awful. It's like, why would you want to put that in a film? It's like the worst looking gameplay footage ever. And then you've got these kids shooting guns that I can't figure out why they did not get someone who knew how to shoot a gun to show them how to shoot a gun, because they're just like and like shooting the gun all over the place and holding it wrong. Like I've never shot a gun. I know you do not hold a gun like that. You're getting nowhere.
Yeah. And I don't think even their guns switch during different takes, like, so, or not takes, like different like cuts, like, so they'd be in the middle of using one gun and then it'd cut and go back to the character and they have a different one and you're like, what?
Like some serious continuity errors here.
Oh God, don't get me started. Like, do you know what my favorite thing was that, so at the start of the film you have like the this guy who's narrating what's going on, and then it freeze frames and does a grayscale and like, this is blah 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 and blah blah blah, and it's meant to be like, I suppose, like building up, like, and making you bit, and you're like, this writing is so bad, I don't give a shit, and none of the characters are redeemable, so you don't actually care, and you're just sitting there and you're just like, okay. And from like the first few seconds you're like, this movie is going to be terrible. And then what I loved about the rave scene is that, one, it was apparently sponsored by Sega, and then
I forgot about that. They had massive Sega banners in the background. And
then like, also, they clearly couldn't get enough extras. There was like 30 people in the massive like rave scene, and I'm just like, oh no. And then they get to the island, and like eventually there's like that group of people get to the island and they're like, everyone's gone. I'm like, it's not very hard to disperse 30 people over a fucking island. Like, oh God, it's just and like, even the continuity of what the zombies could do also didn't make sense. Like, some of them could spit acid and all the rest. Now, I'm pretty sure, now I didn't play like House of the Dead, I haven't played it for years, but I used to play it in the arcade all the time, and it's basically like a rotary shooting game. Do you know what I mean? It is essentially an arcade game, and they put it onto some consoles, but like there's not much else to it, so I don't even understand why a movie came out in the first place. And why he went in the direction of a rave. Apparently some folklore that this guy was on a ship and he's been transported, and then he got to the island and killed everybody, and then that's why there's zombies. I don't know. But like, it's just, oh God, it was just one of those things. And like, you kind of have to watch it for how bad it is. It's one of those. And actually, any of the stuff that he directs, that's kind of why you watch them, is to just be like,
oh, this is awful. How not to make a film. So the second one, Alone in the Dark, is that right? So I got about 15-20 minutes into it and I was like, no, cannot do this. This is awful. The acting is abysmal in it, but it has some pretty big names in it.
Yeah, like you got Christian Slater, who I actually adore. I'm a big Christian Slater fan. And Tara Reid as well, and stuff like that. And there's a few other big names in there. And like, so like essentially with Alone in the Dark, like, it's a paranormal investigator. And that's who Christian Slater's character is. Do you know what I mean? Like, or paranormal detective, whatever he calls himself. Wears a black tank top and a trench coat. And but the amount of different elements and story plot lines that they put into it was so confusing, because it started off that it was like ancient Indian artifacts from these people that like 10,000 years ago, and they all just vanished or something. And then there's like secret military or agency that are also involved, and then there's also souped up orphans. And like, there's so many weird things that are going on that you can't really follow it. And then also, like, well, one, it got 1% on Rotten Tomatoes, which still makes me laugh. It's not even like on those lists of, one's like at 0%. It doesn't even appear on those lists. It's not even worthy of like a list. Like, it's just so awful. And like, I was watching, see, this is what you kind of should watch because it's quite funny and you get really into the director. The director's commentary for this film is just, he's such a weirdo. Like, he's just like, oh, Tara Reid looks very intelligent with her eyeglasses. And like, and it's like, she's meant to be like this really intelligent thing. And then this the actual security guard is actually explaining what the artifacts are and where they come from, instead of the character who's supposed to be the one that like
Yeah.
talks. And then like there's a random sex scene for no point at all. Your man lives, Christian Slater lives in this warehouse apparently for a paranormal detective. I don't know what kind of money you're getting, but apparently it's great. The evil things sometimes turn invisible, but in the movie not at the right times. Like they're just like, no, you see me, no you don't, oh there's no one around, blah blah. And apparently like they're really sensitive to light, and that's the whole point from the
Yeah.
game and stuff like that. But like in the movie, they're just turning them on and off again. And you're like, well, if you're really sensitive to light, you just turn them off. And it's just like
Yeah.
that thing of Ferrati just standing on a light switch. And like, oh, it's so bad. And the acting's so bad. And then the beauty of it all, you get to see the worst action scene that you have ever the displeasure to watch. It is, you didn't get that far. And I
Oh,
kind
I
of,
didn't know.
just look up the clips of the action scene.
Okay.
Like it is beyond terrible, and it's just like it's the worst graphics of like gunfire as well. So it's those like little laser beam lights to protect like bullets.
Yeah.
And like the military come in as well, and like there's all these mad things happening, and there's even scenes where you can see that the bullet trajectory actually misses, but yet the zombies go like, or the whatever they are, just kind of like die anyway. And you're like, but they took time to edit the fact that they missed, and yet the actors and it's one of those things that you watch it and it's like, we're talking about like stupid fucking action tropes of cuts everywhere and stuff like it's just beyond. And also the use of wires in this film, oh wow, like you can see that their stuff is kind of being held up but like, you can see their stuff is held up, and then like there's just such bad like choreographed like fight scenes, and it's just, oh, it's so awful that it's hard to get through. But then I'd say even just to recommend people to watch clips just to see the madness.
Yeah. So don't actually watch the film, just go onto YouTube and see the sporadic. Yeah. Okay. I might do that later, because I couldn't deal with it. I can deal with a lot, but that I could not deal with. So the third one, Blood Rain, I had seen probably when it came out. And I'm pretty sure I didn't get through it all. Again, seems to be a running thing with these films. I did not get through it at all.
Yeah. Like this one also had a major cast. Like, so you had well, essentially, so Rain is a half human, half vampire, born through a rape of her mother with a vampire and whatever. And yeah, that's kind of all you need to know. And but then like you got Meatloaf, who overacts more than I've ever seen anyone else. But like, do you know what? He was having a great time, because then you have like Michelle Rodriguez, Ben Kingsley, and Billy Zane, who have clearly phoned it in. Like the accents are terrible. Their performances, they're all very good actors. Their performances are awful, because you can just like the boredom on their face. They're just like, no. And then some of them, they're just like, you can see them just being like, is this over yet? Like, you have a star-studded cast, and that's why I think why Meatloaf's performance even seems even more like fucking insane. But it's just like, he's just like, fuck it, I'm having fun. I'm surrounded by topless vampire women. I'm just like, la 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 la. And the others are just like,
just kill me now.
Yeah. And once again, it's beautifully over the top, really bad action sequences. You can tell that they didn't train the actors for some of the fight scenes. So like there's even bits where you can see the actors going with swords and they're like real clunky. And you're like, it's real time, and it is, but they're just so clunky. And then they have to do all the cuts to mask the thing. And then there's random sex scenes that don't really need to be in there. Lots of topless women. That's his favorite thing in the whole world, is to put lots of topless women. And he also gave out about Tara Reid not going topless for the sex scene in Alone in the Dark. So it just kind of shows you the type of person that he is. So like, yeah, and then he's also just like, yeah, he's just known for making crap films. And you know what? He's one of those people that's like, I don't care if you hate me, I make money. He doesn't always make money,
Yeah.
but like it's just, oh man, like it's kind of like, you know, like basically like just bad movies. He
Hmm.
picks a script and goes for it and stuff like that. And like the thing is as well, like Blood Rain is actually like an interesting concept because it's about like vampires like coming together to like bring up Adolf Hitler and fight Nazis, and there's loads of like things
Right.
into it. It could be done, and even if you do it satirically, it could be done quite well. Like it's an
Yeah.
interesting enough concept. Just awful, just so bad, and you're just it's just like, oh, not again. And like anytime you
Yeah.
look of like video games adaptations and stuff like that, like his name comes up all the time because he did
Yeah.
like some more action based ones as well without the horror element, and like every time they're just like bad, 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 like just terrible.
So you're saying to stay away from all of his films?
I am. I'm saying
Yeah.
to stay away unless you enjoy, like, you know, like everyone loves The Room because of how ridiculous
Yeah.
it is. It's that kind of thing. But the problem is, The Room is still somewhat more watchable because of how stupid it is. Whereas
Yeah.
these ones, like, you've got really good actors in it, and then like, but they're shit, and the whole thing is crap, and like the effects are terrible, and nothing makes sense. So you're
Yeah.
just, oh, like.
Oh,
But like
no.
they're fun to watch clips of,
Yeah.
100%, and like have a look at how things are done and how they should not be done,
Yeah.
um, and stuff like that. But yeah, like otherwise, it's just sadly the horror video game crossover was
Mhm.
never really that successful.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of why they've steered away from things for a while.
Yeah.
Um, like I know, they were talking about making PT into a movie, and Willem del Toro was actually going to do it because
Yeah.
like he was obviously a part of PT and he's a massive fan as well.
Yeah.
But it's fallen through because they were going to make a full game and everything because it's only a demo, and
Yeah.
that fell through as well, which is devastating. And then we're like, oh, a movie would be so cool, and then that's also not going to happen. So yeah, like so I'd hope that maybe in the future some more stuff will be done.
Mhm.
Like I said, I think TV series might be a
Yeah.
better choice. Um, and then even like, you know, like what used to happen is that you'd have, I don't know, it probably still does happen, but I'm in my rut of rewatching things.
Yeah.
Um, but like where they'd have a TV series and
Uh-huh.
then it builds up everything and then you have a movie. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to be really done anymore. And I think, well, probably because people just wouldn't go and see it because
Yeah.
people's fan has gotten terrible.
Yeah.
But I still think that would be a really interesting way to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
definitely. Yeah.
focus on the TV side of it and
Mhm.
then move on to like a movie and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. It's definitely a genre that needs to be in it for the long run,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
for the amount of kind of backstories and character developments and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. So apart from PT, what game would you love to see being made?
Um, I'd love to see a part of me wants to and then a part of me doesn't.
Mhm.
So like if it's done very well, then I would
Yeah.
love to see Little Nightmares. But
Uh-huh.
I'd love it if it was still the rolling like side view. I'd still
Yeah.
if they could keep it like that, I still think that'd be great because that's like what I love about that game
Yeah.
is the fact that it's that kind of view. And so you can't exactly see what's ahead and there's no
Yeah.
like it's just interesting and the different plays of colors and stuff like that I
Hmm.
think is interesting. So I'd love something like that if it was done quite well. Not sure how well it would work though.
Yeah.
Like I'm not a in any way like producer, director, writer, anything. So I was like, that sounds like it'd be cool. And then I'm like, well, there's probably a reason maybe it won't.
Yeah.
But I'd also see this is a hard one. So I adore Until Dawn so much.
Uh-huh.
That's the poopy out of me, and it still like makes me like, oh Jesus. I love it. There's story, there's everything. I wonder how, you'd be able to do the fact that your decisions change
Yeah.
things. Like, oh, was it the Black Mirror thing where like your decisions apparently change the story?
Yes.
So maybe
Yeah.
they could do it like that in the TV series or something.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
good. Yeah.
yeah. So like maybe something like that. And like I suppose just for myself, just because House of a Thousand Corpses is one of my favorite films,
Yeah.
and I know I'm going off the switcheroo and stuff like that of
Yeah.
actually like movie to video game,
Yeah.
but I'd love to see like that done that way, and
Okay.
I think that would be really interesting. And I
Yeah.
don't know why it's always been on my mind. I absolutely just fucking love House of a Thousand Corpses. So if
Yeah.
that could be turned into a video game, either as playing like as the villains or the
Yeah.
good guys, like I think it'd be really fun.
Yeah, that would
Um,
be, yeah.
yeah, but I think that's really it though. I wouldn't like even if they could do those other things well
Yeah.
enough, that'd be great. Then I think some things just have to remain like video games because they work
Yeah.
better in that sense, do you
Yeah,
know?
they're meant for that medium, and they should kind of stay that medium. Otherwise, they lose their kind of integrity, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, not exactly the same, but it's kind of the same when they do book adaptations, like movie adaptations of books, and it's just not the same because it only works in that medium,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really translate well to film. So that's kind of the end of our little chat about video game movie adaptations. I've already asked you what your favorite horror film is, but what is, apart from what we've already discussed, what is the worst horror film you've ever seen?
Oh, that's a toughie now.
Yeah.
Worst horror film. Well, we'll put aside the ones we talked about
Yeah.
today. They're up there.
Yeah.
Worst horror film. Worst horror film. Oh, um, hmm. Oh,
It's probably a harder question than like, what's your favorite horror film?
yeah, like I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like I've probably like banished it from my memory or something like that. Or I didn't like it for probably like a really, as I said before, I get quite arsy about things, and if they follow from like comics or
Yeah.
whatever, I'm really annoyed. And they don't like live up to it. I would say worst horror film would possibly be later sequels of really good slasher films. I'm just going
Okay.
that bubble.
Yeah.
I like, where it's so strong and then it's just womp and they're
Yeah.
trying to come back up and you're just like, it's too late, just kill it. It's already dead.
Yeah, stop trying to revive it. Fetch
Yeah.
isn't happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with that. So we're talking about, the sequels to like Halloween,
Mhm. Nightmare on Elm Street.
yeah,
And,
Friday the 13th, yeah, all that. I really like it when they do the crossovers. Freddy versus Jason. I think
yeah.
that is the best, most awful film ever.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know. Like yeah, like I think that would be the only kind of thing I'd say were like the worst things. But if anyone is interested in like looking up kind of, so there's a lot of indie horror games. The amount of them is just so much. So you can play them on multiple platforms. Like Itch.io is usually a good one to like find indie horror
Yeah.
games. There's game jams every like year or so, and there's specific ones just for horror games. And so it's all just independent developers, usually very small budgets. Sometimes they're only told to use a certain amount of a budget. And it's just little mini projects in a very specific amount of time. And then they release them out and people play them. Due to the fact that I'm terrible for finding time to do things that I enjoy, I tend to just watch a lot of YouTube playthroughs.
Yeah.
Like one of the people that I religiously watch is John Wolfe, because he's seriously like just like hates a lot of things, picks up on a lot of the same, very intelligent about how much he knows about games and how they're developed, what the constant things are used and stuff. And but it's great because you get to like watch a playthrough, look at all these indie developers, and then you can go and play them yourself if you want to. Do you know what I mean? So like I always think that's really helpful for people that are trying to maybe get into it, try and figure out what they want to see and like what they might want to play, and then they can go through that realm. You know what I mean? So it's pretty handy. Like
That's
I like
really
it.
good. That's really good info there. I might check that out myself. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. So that was my chat there with Emma Tyrrell about video games, horror video games. and their movie adaptations. We talked about Resident Evil, and we also talked about Silent Hill, as well as a few other really awful video game adaptations. So what are your thoughts on this week's episode? Are you a fan of video games? Are you a fan of the horror genre within video games? I'd really like to play Until Dawn and a few other horror games. At least I try without throwing my remote into the TV. But yeah, let me know what you think the best horror video game is in the comments on our social media. So that is Facebook and Instagram at What a Scream Podcast. Or you can get in touch with me through email, whatascreampodcast@gmail.com. We are also on Twitter at what_scream. Hit me up there. I know I should be a bit more vocal and stuff on Twitter. I'm just kind of still getting my head around it. And we are also on Letterboxd, so you can keep up with all the films that we are going to be talking about, reviewing. Don't forget, we also have the mini episodes every week. They are released on Thursdays, and that is where me and my sister review new films that have just been released, or films that may have gone under your radar in last year's cesspit of a year. So as always, I hope you are staying safe. I hope you are surviving. And as always, stay horrific. Goodbye. Shouldn't be scared of Dracula. Shouldn't be scared of the mummy. Shouldn't be scared of Frankenstein's monster. You should be scared of it.